country for his political gain. He called it a favor. Do us a favor, he said. But it wasn't a favor. It was a coordinated attempt to undermine the rule of law. Because of those actions, Congress is compelled to be here, to uphold the rule of law, to make sure Americans hear the truth, to say that no one, not even a president, can abuse the system without fair and just consequences. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Oklahoma.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield 2 minutes to the distinguished ranking member of the House Intelligence Committee, my good friend, Mr. Nunes from California.
Gentleman's recognized for 2 minutes.
I want to thank the gentleman. We are not here to run a show trial in an effort to impeach the President of the United States. It's clear that since the Democrats took control of the House of Representatives, they have always intended to transform the Intelligence Committee into the Impeachment Committee. Every one of their actions, from the staff they hire to the Trump conspiracy theories they investigate, their willful neglect of our basic oversight duties, demonstrates that this has been their plan from day one. And now this is further confirmed by the adoption of these rules, which simply gives the House approval for the Intelligence Committee Democrats to continue pursuing their bizarre obsession with overturning the results of the last presidential election. Nevertheless, after spending 3 years trying to manufacture a crime they can attribute to President Trump, they've come up empty. First, they insisted that the president is a Russian agent. Then they claimed he's a money launderer and a tax cheat and a fraudulent businessman. And now they've decided they don't like the way he talks to foreign leaders. But they have no evidence and no argument to support impeachment. All they have is the unconditional cooperation of the media and their advance their preposterous narrative. If they had a real case, they wouldn't be wasting time spoon-feeding ridiculous attacks that include defamation and slander on both current and former Republican staff of the Intelligence Committee. What we're seeing among Democrats on the Intelligence Committee down in the SCIF right now is like a cult. These are a group of people loyally following their leader as he bounces from one outlandish conspiracy theory to another. And the media are the cult followers, permanently stationed outside the committee spaces, pretending to take everything seriously because they too support the goal of removing the president from office.
Gentleman's time's
Regardless
expired.
of the
Gentleman's
means
time's expired.
I yield the gentleman 15 seconds to close.
Gentleman's recognized.
After today, the House Intelligence Committee ceases to exist. Oversight is not being done. And we now have a full-fledged impeachment committee in the basement of the Capitol. Think about that, America. And I'll yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Massachusetts.
Madam Speaker, I'm proud to yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Maryland, a distinguished member of the Rules Committee, Mr. Raskin.
Gentleman's recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The House impeachment inquiry has discovered a substantial body of evidence that the President of the United States has violated the Constitution by placing his political interests above the interests of the country, thereby putting both our democracy and the nation's security in jeopardy. In light of this evidence, the House of Representatives must fully investigate. We have sworn a sacred oath to uphold and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. We will honor our oath by countering all high crimes and misdemeanors committed against the American people and our Constitution. Today's resolution sets the table for the next phase of the inquiry. This phase includes open hearings led by the Intelligence Committee to allow the American people to hear from witnesses who have personal knowledge of the President's actions. Relevant materials will then be transferred to the Judiciary Committee so we may fulfill our solemn and time-honored duty to determine whether to recommend articles of impeachment. The majority has conducted hearings up to this point in a scrupulously bipartisan way, giving professional staff counsel for both the majority and the minority precisely equal time to question witnesses and equal opportunities for members of the majority and the minority to question them too. Despite...
Fire. Gentleman.
I yield the gentleman an additional 20 seconds.
Gentleman's recognized.
We will afford the president all the due process protections that were afforded to his predecessors in a similar situation. That includes the ability to attend hearings, question witnesses, and submit evidence. As recently as Friday, the federal courts have reaffirmed that the House is the sole judge of impeachment, and we set the rules here. These rules are fair and strong, and will make sure that we can and we will defend the Constitution of the United States. I yield back.
Gentleman from Oklahoma.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield 2 minutes to my good friend, the distinguished ranking member of the House Oversight Committee, Mr. Jordan from Ohio.
The gentleman's recognized for 2 minutes.
I thank the gentleman. Madam Speaker, trying to put a ribbon on a sham process doesn't make it any less of a sham. Never forget how this whole thing started. Democrats are trying to impeach the President of the United States 13 months before an election based on an anonymous whistleblower with no firsthand knowledge, who has a bias against the president, who worked with Vice President Biden. The day after the now famous phone call between President Trump and President Zelensky, the so-called whistleblower gets a readout from somebody on that call, writes a memo. In the memo, he uses terms like, this call was scary, frightening. But what does he do? Waits 18 days before he files a complaint. And who's the first person he goes to see, the first people he goes to see in that 18-day time frame? Chairman Schiff's staff. Chairman Schiff's staff, 435 members of Congress, only one individual, one member of this body knows who this person is who started this whole darn crazy process. Chairman Schiff. And what's this resolution do? Gives him even more power to run this secret proceeding in a bunker in the basement of the Capitol. This resolution continues the unfair and partisan process. Just 2 days ago, we were prevented from having the witness answer our questions in one of these depositions. And this resolution is going to give more power to the person who made that decision in the bunker in the basement of the Capitol. We are less than 13 months before the next election. Americans understand that this is unfair. Americans get fairness. They instinctively know this is an unfair and partisan process. They will see how unfair and partisan it is today when the vote happens on the floor of this House. We can do a lot better than this. We can do a lot better than this, and the American people see through it. I urge a no vote on this resolution, and I thank the gentleman on the Rules Committee for his work and his leadership. With that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Massachusetts.
Yeah, Madam Speaker, I'd like to ask unanimous consent to insert into the record a New York Times article titled "Army Officer Who Heard Trump's Ukraine Call Reported Concerns," in which Colonel Alexander Vindman, an Army officer who was on the call, said, and I quote, "I did not think it was proper to demand that a foreign government investigate a U.S. citizen," and quote, "This would all undermine U.S. national security." And I'd like to yield 1 minute to the gentleman from South Carolina, the Majority Whip, Mr. Clyburn.
Gentleman's recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I thank the gentleman for yielding me the time. Over the last month, the impeachment inquiry has built a powerful body of evidence around President Trump's call with President Zelensky of Ukraine when he told the foreign leader, "I'd like you to do us a favor, though." We've learned so much about that call and things that followed it because some dedicated public servants have demonstrated their patriotism to this great country by coming forward and testifying and giving us the information as they know it. These brave patriots have been called career, radical, unelected bureaucrats. They've been called that by a group of people who Thomas Paine would call summer soldiers and sunshine patriots. He warned us that these people will come forward in a crisis, shrink from the service of the country, but he that stands it now deserves the love and thanks of man and woman, for tyranny like hell is not easily conquered, yet we have this conflict with us. The harder the conflict, the more glorious the triumph. We are here today because brave, dedicated public servants and patrons are standing up for their country.
Gentleman from Oklahoma.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I recognize my good friend, fellow member of the Rules Committee, the distinguished gentleman from Texas, Mr. Burgess, for 2 minutes.
Gentleman's recognized for 2 minutes.
And I thank the gentleman for yielding. Yesterday, Rules Committee reported an impeachment resolution that was hastily drafted without Republican input and just 24 hours notice for review. Last night, we offered on the Republican side 17 amendments. Unsurprisingly, none were adopted. despite assurances that all members will have access to materials supporting the articles of impeachment, to date, Chairman Schiff has ignored 72 bipartisan requests to view Ambassador Volker's transcript. But pursuant to Rule 11, Clause 2E2, committee records are the property of the House, and thus members of the House should have access. Last night, the Rules Committee, it was stated that perhaps Republicans were not requesting the information at the right time. So you have to ask, when is the right time to ask to view our own House records? Republicans requested an authorizing vote, and now we will have one. However, this process has not been open and transparent, and it diverts from precedent set in the two most recent presidential impeachment investigations. As a result, this investigation will be conducted with no minority input. A presidential impeachment investigation is a national trauma. All members must take this constitutionally vested power seriously, and Americans deserve to be represented in this process. Unfortunately, neither serious nor equal consideration nor full access to records appear to be criteria under which the Democrats are willing to conduct this investigation. That is a shame, and it renders this process a sham. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Massachusetts.
Madam Speaker, I'm proud to yield 1 minute to the gentlewoman from Pennsylvania, a distinguished member of the Rules Committee, Ms. Scanlon.
Gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
I take no joy in contemplating the impeachment of a president, because in contemplating it, we must acknowledge a threat to our Constitution and the values that bind us, not only as members of Congress, but as Americans. We've tried to work within traditional means to get to the bottom of serious allegations of misconduct so that we can deliver the truth to the American people. Committees have called witnesses and requested evidence only to be stonewalled. The president's defenders have tried to distract the American people by falsely claiming to have been excluded from the investigation, while their stunts and smears have hindered the constitutional process. This resolution outlines ground rules for the House as we move forward, granting the same or greater due process rights to the president and the minority as they themselves drafted when they were in the majority. We will have open hearings. They can question witnesses. They can propose subpoenas. They can present evidence. I am proud to sponsor this resolution. Our Constitution requires it, and our democracy depends on it. And with that, I yield back.
Gentleman from Oklahoma.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I yield 2 minutes to my good friend, distinguished Republican ranking member of the House Judiciary Committee from the state of Georgia, Mr. Collins.
Gentleman's recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. No matter what is said by the other side today, this is a dark day and a cloud has fallen on this House. It has been falling for 10 months and it is showing itself today. What we are seeing is this. If the gentleman who is a friend of mine from the Rules Committee would actually want to talk about are these the same rules as Clinton and Nixon, then we would have had a much longer period of debate, because he knows and I know it is not. There are similarities, some better, some not, but they are not the same. Let's get that out of the way first. The problem I'm having here is the resolution before us today is not about transparency, it's about control. It's not about fairness, it's about winning. It's about following the facts. This resolution is about delivering results. You know how I know this? Because the resolution gives no proper way for how these abilities or transferring of documents from the Intel Committee to Judiciary Committee will happen. Doesn't even give a time frame. And I've heard a lot of discussion today about maybe we didn't know how to properly ask last night in Rules Committee. I'll guarantee you my staff and I know how to properly use Rule 11-2E to ask for information. And we're told yesterday by a committee, one of the committees, that we couldn't have access to it because the parliamentarians said we couldn't. That's just false and needs to stop. This House is developing and shredding procedures every day. And if members of the minority or the majority cannot have the rights that they are given, then we're in a sad situation. And in fact, the haste to put this together, they didn't even exempt, as was done in Clinton and Nixon, the Rule 11-2E. They didn't even exempt it out. Even in those two impeachments, it was known that maybe we don't let every member come see this while this is going on. We didn't even exempt it during this time. We were so hurried to impeach this president, we don't really give a darn about the rules. But here's my biggest concern. As ranking member of the Judiciary Committee, I have a question. We've been here 200 plus years as a committee, and our committee has been neutered. Our committee who handles impeachment, we're the reason in that committee, that's our jurisdiction. We have been completely sidelined. Our chairman and others have been sidelined, so I have been sidelined. It is so bad that they had to have the Rules Committee write the presidential due process and give it to us. This is not right. I wish... Another 30 seconds.
Yield the gentleman an additional 15 seconds to
Gentleman's recognized.
I do not know what happened to our committee, but we still exist. Due process only kicks in at Judiciary for the president. It does not kick in the closed-door secret hearings of Adam Schiff. This is a travesty. No one should vote for this. This is a sad day. The curtain is coming down on this House because the majority has no idea about process and procedure. They're simply after a president. I yield back.
Gentleman from Massachusetts.
Madam Speaker, I get it. My friends on the other side of the aisle want to talk about process. But it's interesting that not one of them wants to talk about the president's conduct, and that speaks volumes. At this time, I would like to yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Florida, another distinguished member of the Rules Committee, Mr. Hastings.
Gentleman's recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Chairman, and I thank Ranking Member Cole for the manner in which you all are shepherding us through this difficult process. Madam Speaker, it's time for the American people to see how the administration put our national security on the auction block in exchange for political favors. At the heart of this scandal is the White House's decision to slam the brakes on nearly $400 million of military aid for Ukraine. Military aid for a vital partner. Military aid that was desperately needed to beat back Russian aggression. Military aid that was key to our own national security and essential in keeping an adversary at bay. We know what our Ukrainian friends thought about this. They were horrified. The facts are clear. Our top national security experts viewed it as a grave and dangerous mistake. And as we've seen time and time again from the Trump administration, this decision played right into Vladimir Putin's hands.
I yield the gentleman additional 20 seconds.
Gentleman's recognized.
I support pushing ahead with this inquiry because I swore an oath to defend the Constitution against America's enemies. The American people deserve the facts about how this abuse of power betrayed our national security and put our country at risk.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Oklahoma.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Before I proceed, I yield myself such time as I may consume to quickly respond to my friend, Mr. McGovern. We're debating process here because that's what this is. This is a process resolution to impeach the President of the United States. You didn't accept a single amendment last night. You didn't confer with us when you did it, so that's why we're talking process. It's an unfair process. With that, I yield to my good friend and fellow member of the Rules Committee, distinguished lady from Arizona, Ms. Lesko. 2 minutes.
How much
Madam
time?
Speaker.
Gentlelady is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I thank Representative Cole for yielding. This impeachment process is a total sham. This resolution, which seeks to legitimize it, misleads the American public. Section 2 of this bill is titled, "The Open and Transparent Investigative Proceedings by the Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence." But the process set forth in this resolution is far from open and far from transparent. In fact, it is the exact opposite. The resolution continues the closed-door meetings that blocks entry to members of Congress and prohibits the president's due process rights. And it merely authorizes, but does not require Chairman Schiff to make transcripts public. Last night, Republicans offered 17 amendments to add some fairness into the process, but Democrats rejected them all. I had an amendment to ensure minority witnesses could call an equal number of witnesses as the majority. Democrats said no. I had an amendment to require the Intel chairman to turn over exculpatory materials to the Judiciary Committee. Democrats shot it down. I had an amendment to give ranking members of the same authority as chairman to submit materials to the Judiciary Committee. Democrats rejected that too. The process set forth by this resolution violates basic standards of fairness. I urge opposition to this resolution, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentlelady yields back. Gentleman from Massachusetts.
Madam Speaker, I yield myself 10 seconds.
Gentleman's recognized.
The gentlelady wants to talk about a sham process. Let's talk about a sham process. Instead of respecting the constitutional authority of the House of Representatives, the White House has obstructed our investigation, ignored our duly authorized subpoenas, withheld key documents, prevented witnesses from testifying, and intimidated witnesses. They have tried to disparage members of Congress. I yield myself an additional 5 seconds. And who are trying to, they've disparaged members of Congress who are trying to fulfill their responsibilities under the Constitution of the United States. Article 1 of the Constitution gives the House the right to investigate the President, and we are taking our responsibility seriously. Madam Speaker, I'd like to yield 1 minute to the gentleman from New York, the chairman of the Democratic Caucus, Mr. Jeffries.
Gentleman's recognized for 1 minute.
The House impeachment inquiry is about abuse of power. It's about betrayal. It's about corruption. It's about national security. It's about the undermining of our elections. It's about defending our democracy for the people. The House is a separate and co-equal branch of government. We don't work for this president or any president. We work for the American people. We have a constitutional responsibility to serve as a check and balance on an out-of-control executive branch. Our job is to ask difficult questions on behalf of the American people. What we are doing right here is consistent with the words of James Madison, who in Federalist 51 said the House should be a rival to the executive branch. Why did Madison use the word rival? The founders didn't want a king. They didn't want a dictator. They didn't want a monarch. They wanted a democracy, and that is exactly what we are defending right now. No one is above the law.
Gentleman from Oklahoma.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I yield 2 minutes to my good friend, distinguished conference chair for the Republican Party, Ms. Cheney from Wyoming.
Gentlelady is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you very much, and thank you to our Republican leader of the Rules Committee for yielding to me. Madam Speaker, we have heard a lot this morning already, a desire, a desperation almost on the part of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle that the nation take this body seriously. Then they need to start acting like they take themselves seriously, Madam Speaker. When we are here gathered discussing this most grave and solemn obligation we have, addressing impeachment, we know, Madam Speaker, what a serious process would look like. We have seen it before. We have seen members on both sides of this aisle in the past, when we've been engaged in the impeachment of a president, act in a way that is serious, reflects the dignity of this body, and reflects the importance of the Constitution. That is the opposite, Madam Speaker, of what we have seen so far. No matter what my colleagues say about this legislation, no matter what my colleagues say about the process they've been engaged in to date, it is absolutely the case that it has been a secret process that has denied rights to the minority, that has involved leaking selectively things that the majority would like to have leaked, in which rights have absolutely been denied, and they cannot fix that. They cannot fix what has been a tainted record and a tainted process by now suddenly pretending they're opening it up. And Madam Speaker, let me say one other thing. Every time I hear my colleagues on the other side of the aisle talk about efforts to somehow undermine national security for political gain, I can't help but think about what they are doing precisely this morning. When we are facing the threats we are facing as a nation, and my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, Speaker Pelosi and Chairman Schiff and others, take what is arguably the single most important national security committee in this body, the House Intelligence Committee, and they tell the House Intelligence Committee, turn away from those threats. Do not focus on oversight. Do not focus on the challenges we face. And instead, we are going to consume you in a political, partisan process to impeach the President of the United States. Madam Speaker, my colleagues on the Democratic side of the aisle will be held accountable by history for what they are doing.
Yield the gentlelady an additional 15 seconds to close, Madam Speaker.
They will be held accountable by history for what they are doing. They have absolutely no right to talk about threats to this nation if they are diverting the full attention, resources, and focus of the House Intelligence Committee onto a sham political process run by Chairman Schiff and Speaker Pelosi. I urge my colleagues to oppose this resolution, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman's time's expired. Gentleman Gentleman from Massachusetts.
Madam Speaker, I am delighted to yield 1 minute to the gentlewoman from Florida, a distinguished member of the Rules Committee, Ms. Shalala.
Gentlelady is recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, having been through this before, I know how painful impeachment investigations can be. I also know that I'm not alone in saying that supporting this continuing inquiry is not a decision that any of us makes lightly. None of us has ever hoped to consider investigating our own president for compromising our national security and obstructing justice. Regardless of political ideology, we all understand our constitutional duty. It's with profound sadness and disappointment that we have to continue this investigation. The accusations the House is investigating go straight to the heart of our Constitution. Our Constitution endows us with not only the authority, but also the duty to hold our colleagues in the federal government accountable if they fail to act in the best interests of our nation. I don't think anyone here believes that domestic politics should interfere with foreign policy. I hope we will all vote to continue this investigation simply so that we can be clear on all the facts. More than anything, I'm confident that all of us possess a capacity for fairness and a commitment to doing what is right for the country we love. I yield back.
Gentleman from Oklahoma.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I yield 1 minute to my good friend, distinguished Republican ranking member on the House Ways and Means Committee, Mr. Brady from Texas.
Gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The impeachment and removal of the president is a serious matter. At its heart, it lets a small partisan group in Washington overturn the will of the entire American people. Above all, Americans believe in fairness, and when accused the right to due process, this sham impeachment offers neither. It's secret, it's partisan, it's being conducted behind closed doors to hide information from the American people, all with one goal in mind: take down President Trump by any means necessary. I will not legitimize this unprecedented and unfair charade with this vote today. Speaker Pelosi and Chairman Schiff long ago abandoned the due process and fairness that was guaranteed during the Clinton impeachment. I know because I was here in Congress for it. There is simply no cause for this impeachment inquiry, none, and it's shameful to create a constitutional crisis for purely partisan reasons. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Massachusetts.
Madam Speaker, I'm proud to yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from California, the distinguished chairman of the Select Committee on Intelligence, Mr. Schiff.
Gentleman is recognized for 2 minutes.
Madam Speaker, I rise in strong support of House Resolution 660. I rise in strong support, but I do not take any pleasure in the events that have made this process necessary. I rise in strong support of the resolution, but I do so with an understanding that the task before us is a solemn one. How each member of this chamber approaches the vote this morning and the days and weeks ahead may be the most important service as members of Congress we will ever pay to the country and Constitution that we all love and have pledged to defend. For the past several weeks, the Intelligence Committee, the Oversight Committee, and the Foreign Affairs Committee have engaged in an intensive investigation. That work, which has been conducted with equal opportunities for both parties to question witnesses, has added a great deal to our understanding of the President's conduct, as evident in the July 25 call record and the events that both preceded and followed that call. That work has necessarily occurred behind closed doors because we have had the task of finding the facts ourselves without the benefit of the investigation that the Justice Department declined to undertake. Despite attempts to obstruct, we have interviewed numerous witnesses. We have provided important testimony about the efforts to secure political favors from Ukraine, who have provided important testimony about the efforts to secure political favors from Ukraine. We have reviewed text messages among key players which show how securing political investigations was placed at the forefront of our foreign policy towards Ukraine. This resolution sets the stage for the next phase of our investigation, one in which the American people will have the opportunity to hear from the witnesses firsthand. We will continue to conduct this inquiry with the seriousness of purpose that our task deserves, because it is our duty and because no one is above the law. Madam Speaker, I urge passage of the resolution, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Oklahoma.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield 1 minute to my good friend from the great state of Texas, Mr. Babin.
Gentleman's recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you. What began with a rallying cry of "we're going to impeach the expletive deleted" to a crowd of liberal activists and young children by my colleague from Michigan on the very first day of this new Congress is now the majority's flagship initiative. What a shame and what a waste of time in the people's house. My view, our president was doing his job, ensuring that if taxpayer dollars from my constituents and yours was going to the other side of the world, that it would be paired with a commitment to crack down on corruption at all levels, no matter who someone's daddy is or what their political ambitions are. I think we all know that this was inevitable. From the moment Donald J. Trump was elected, the ends of harassment and impeachment have just been waiting for the means, and they think that they found them. They're wrong. There is, however, one small measure we can take as one house to bring a shred of dignity to these disgraceful proceedings. I can stand and be counted. We can stand and be counted one by one and announce our yea or nay with a vote by a call of the roll. To that end, Madam Speaker, I have a parliamentary inquiry. Gentleman's
time's expired. Gentleman from Massachusetts.
Madam Speaker, I'm proud to yield 1 minute to the gentlewoman from California, the Speaker, Ms. Pelosi.
Gentlelady's recognized for 1 minute.
I thank the gentleman for yielding, and Madam Speaker, thank you for the recognition. I want to begin my remarks by some of the most beautiful words in our country's history. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and to our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution of the United States. It goes on immediately to establish Article 1, the legislative branch, Article 2, the executive branch, Article 3, the judiciary. The genius of the Constitution, a separation of powers, 3 co-equal branches of government to be a check and balance on each other. And it's to that we take the oath of office. We gather here on that opening day with our families gathered round to proudly raise our hand to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States. And that is exactly what we are doing today. Sadly, this is not any cause for any glee or comfort. This is something that is very solemn, that is something prayerful, and that we had to gather so much information to take us to this next step. Again, this is a solemn occasion. Nobody, I doubt anybody in this place or anybody that you know comes to Congress to take the oath of office, comes to Congress to impeach the President of the United States, unless his actions are jeopardizing our honoring our oath of office. So I'm grateful to our committee chairs for all of the careful and thoughtful investigation they have been doing as this inquiry has proceeded. And today, the House takes the next step forward as we establish the procedures for open hearings conducted by the House Intelligence Committee so that the public can see the facts for themselves. This resolution ensures transparency, advancing public disclosure of deposition transcripts, and outlining the procedures for the transfer of evidence to the Judiciary Committee to use in its proceedings. It enables effective public hearings, setting out procedures for the questioning of witnesses and continuing the precedent of giving the minority the same rights in questioning witnesses as the majority, which has been true at every step of this inquiry, despite what you might hear fulminating there. It provides the President and his counsel opportunities to participate, including presenting his case, submitting requests for testimony, attending hearings, raising objections to testimony given, cross-examining witnesses, and more. And contrary to what you may have heard today, we give more opportunity to his case than was given to other presidents before. And thank you, Mr. Chairman, for making that point so clearly. And these actions, this process, these open hearings, seeking the truth and making it available to the American people, will inform Congress on the very difficult decisions we will have to make in the future as to whether to impeach the president. That decision has not been made. That's what the inquiry will investigate, and then we can make the decision based on the truth. I don't know why the Republicans are afraid of the truth. Every member should support allowing the American people to hear the facts for themselves. That is really what this vote is about. It's about the truth. And what is at stake? What is at stake in all of this is nothing less than our democracy. I proudly stand next to the flag, and I thank the gentleman from New York for providing it for us. This flag, so many have fought and died for this flag, which stands for our democracy. When Benjamin Franklin came out of Independence Hall, you've heard this over and over, on September 17th, 1787, the day our Constitution was adopted, he came out of Independence Hall and people said to him, Dr. Franklin, what do we have, a monarchy or a republic? And he said, as you know, he said, a republic, if we can keep it. If we can keep it. And this Constitution is the blueprint for our republic and not a monarchy. But when we have a president who says, Article 2 says I can do whatever I want, that is in defiance of the separation of powers. That's not what our Constitution says. So what is at stake is our democracy. What are we fighting for? Defending our democracy for the people. You know that in the early days of our revolution, Thomas Paine said, the times have found us. The times found our founders to declare independence from a monarchy, to fight a war of independence, to write our founding documents, and thank God they made them amendable so that we can always be expanding freedom. And the genius, again, the genius of that Constitution was the separation of powers. Any usurping of that power is a violation of our oath of office. So proudly, we all raised our hand to protect and defend and support the Constitution of the United States. That's what this vote is about today. And we think the times found our founders, the times have found others in the course of our history to protect our democracy, to keep our country united. The times have found each and every one of us in this room and in our country to pay attention to how we protect and defend the Constitution of the United States, honoring the vision of our founders who declared independence from a monarch and established a country contrary to that principle, honoring the men and women in uniform who fight for our flag and for our freedom and for our democracy, and honoring the aspirations of our children so that no president, whoever he or she may be in the future, could decide that Article 2 says they can do whatever they want. Again, let us honor our oath of office. Let us defend our democracy. Let us have a good vote today and have clarity as to how we proceed, why we proceed, and again, doing so in a way that honors the Constitution. We must honor the Constitution in how we do this. We must respect the institution we serve. And we must heed the further words of our founders, e pluribus unum, from any one. They didn't know how many be or how different we would be, but they knew that we needed to always be unifying. So hopefully as we go forward with this, with a clarity of purpose, a clarity of procedure, a clarity of fact, a clarity of truth, It's about the truth. It's about the Constitution. We will do so in a way that brings people together, that is healing rather than dividing, and that is how we will honor our oath of office. I urge an aye vote and yield back the balance of my time.
Gentlelady yields back. Gentleman from Oklahoma.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield 2 minutes to my good friend, distinguished gentleman from Texas and the ranking Republican member on the House Foreign Affairs Committee, Mr. McCall.
Gentleman's recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I would also argue that Article 1 does not say you can do whatever you want to do. And the Constitution says that, and our founding fathers said that as well. And for 38 days, I have objected to this impeachment probe because it denies due process, fundamental transparency, and basic fairness to Republicans, the White House, and the American people. From day one, Democrats have ignored the rules and 45 years of historic impeachment precedent. Without any authorization, Adam Schiff has conducted a secret probe outside of his committee's jurisdiction. He has blocked us from calling our own witnesses. His witnesses are being interviewed behind closed doors in the most secretive room in the United States Capitol. That is not democracy. He has muzzled Republicans. I've been in the room, placing a gag order on depositions while leaking cherry-picked facts to the press. He refuses to even allow us to read the transcripts without being babysat by a Democrat staffer. He has refused to let us hear from the most important witness who brought this entire thing, the whistleblower. He has barred White House counsel from any participation. And now, 38 days into the Democrats' rush to impeachment, Speaker Pelosi claims she wants to establish rules and transparency. You cannot make your game fair by allowing the opposing team onto the field at the 2-minute warning. The bipartisan precedents from Nixon and Clinton still must be followed, and they are not being followed under this resolution. The White House counsel remains shut out of this process. This is unacceptable. Only 3 times in our nation's history has Congress exercised its grave power of impeachment. Our founding fathers in Federalist Papers number 65, Alexander Hamilton, warned us of abusing this power because they saw a future Congress abusing it.
Gentleman, an additional 15 seconds to close, Madam Speaker.
They foresaw a Congress at one point in history abusing this process for partisan political gain. So instead of overturning an entire election with a partisan weapon, we should just allow the American people to vote.
Gentleman's time's expired.
With that, I yield
Gentleman from
back.
Massachusetts.
Madam Speaker, I am proud to yield 1 minute to the gentlewoman from California, a distinguished member of the Rules Committee, Ms. Torres.
Gentlelady is recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, I rise in strong support of H.R. 660. Impeachment is not something that we take lightly. But when the president endangers our national security, he gives us no other choice. We now know from Trump's own call record that he pressured a foreign government to interfere in our elections and investigate his political opponent. We now know that Trump's potentially sought to apply leverage on Ukraine. First, with a coveted White House meeting. Second, by withholding security assistance to fend off Russian aggression. Today's resolution allows us to present these facts in a clear, professional, and fair way. I urge passage of H.R. 660 so the American people can too learn the truth. And I yield back.
Gentleman from Oklahoma.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I yield 30 seconds to my good friend, distinguished gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Biggs.
Gentleman is recognized for 30 seconds.
Thank you. I've heard today how much my colleagues on the other side wish to make this an open, transparent process, and this is for we the people. And I would really like to believe that. And yet, after they introduce the resolution, they have another week's full of hearings behind closed doors, and they schedule another week's full of hearings behind closed doors. If this is about transparency, then open it up. If you want the American people to see it, open it up. Give members access to the transcripts. Let the media into the room. Let us participate. Failing to do so denies transparency, gives the lie to what you're saying.
Speaker, I'm proud to yield 1 minute to the gentleman from California, a distinguished member of the Rules Committee, Mr. DeSaulnier.
Gentleman's recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise in strong support of this resolution. From the very start of this inquiry, the White House has obstructed the House of Representatives. The White House has completely ignored duly authorized subpoenas and has tried to prevent witnesses from testifying. The White House has also directed other agencies to do the same. The Department of State, Department of Energy, Department of Defense, the Office of Management and Budget, all have refused to produce a single document in response to valid subpoenas. This is an unprecedented cover-up, and the White House and its defenders in Congress have tried to justify it with baseless procedural claims that contradict the Constitution and historical precedent. History will judge us all. After today, there are no more excuses for those who want to focus on process instead of substance. After today, there are no more excuses for those who want to ignore the facts and instead of defending the Constitution. And there are no more excuses for those who turn a blind eye while the President pressures foreign actors to interfere with our democracy. I yield back the balance of my time.
Madam Speaker, I have a speaker on the way, so I'm going to reserve for the moment, if I may.
Reserves. Gentleman from Massachusetts.
Madam Speaker, I yield 1 minute to the gentleman from New York, another distinguished member of the Rules Committee, Mr. Morelli.
Gentleman's recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, I rise today in strong support of House Resolution 660. I am deeply troubled that this process has become necessary at all. But we have no choice. We must continue to investigate alarming allegations of misconduct by the President. And we continue with a public process through which all Americans will have the ability to access and to assess the evidence. This has been and will continue to be a fair and sober inquiry. Members on both sides will continue to have the opportunity to question witnesses, seek evidence, and refute testimony presented during these proceedings. Indeed, the President will have strong protections as we weigh the evidence during our deliberations. Our only goal is uncovering the truth. Did the President pressure Ukrainian leaders with the threat of withholding critical military assistance in order to serve his political interests? Has the President endangered American interests abroad by engaging in domestic political intrigue? These are serious issues, not of politics, but of national security. This inquiry is our solemn obligation, but it is our obligation nonetheless. I urge my colleagues to join me in supporting this resolution so we may uphold our oath to the Constitution and preserve a transparent process on behalf of our
Gentleman from
Republic
Oklahoma.
and the
Thank you
citizens.
very much, Madam Speaker. I yield 3 minutes to the distinguished whip of the House Republican Conference, my good friend from Louisiana, Mr. Scalise.
Gentleman's recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I thank my colleague, Mr. Cole, for yielding. Madam Speaker, I rise in strong opposition to this resolution. Unfortunately, we've seen since the day that President Trump was inaugurated, there have been some people that made it public that they wanted to impeach him. Not because there are high crimes and misdemeanors, which is the constitutional standard, but just because they don't agree with the results of the 2016 election. That, Madam Speaker, is not why you impeach a president. There is precedent. This has only happened 3 times in the history of our country. Every time it not only started with a full vote of the House, but it also started with actual fairness. We're not getting that fairness today. When you look through this resolution, in multiple places, it gives veto authority by the chair to literally reject any witness that's brought forward by the minority. So no rights for the minority unless the chair so designates. In fact, in this resolution, it allows the chair to veto even the ability for the president to have legal counsel in the room. If the chair chooses at his whim, they can literally kick out the president's legal counsel. This is unprecedented. It's not only unprecedented, this is Soviet-style rules. Maybe in the Soviet Union, you do things like this, where only you make the rules, where you reject the ability for the person you're accusing to even be in the room, to question what's going on, for anybody else to call witnesses, when only one person has the right to call witnesses. And as we saw just the other day, the chairman was literally directing the witness to not answer certain questions by the Republicans. What kind of fairness is that? Maybe you think it's fairness if you can run roughshod over somebody because you've got the votes, but that's not how impeachment was supposed to go. In fact, Alexander Hamilton himself, during the debate on the Constitution in the Federalist Papers, Alexander Hamilton warned of days like this, and I quote, "The greatest danger is that the decision on impeachment will be regulated more by the comparative strength of parties than by the real demonstrations of innocence or guilt." Alexander Hamilton warned about days like today. This is not what we should be doing. Clearly, when you ask the American people who know that they're paying higher drug prices, and they see that there's legislation, bipartisan legislation to lower drug prices, that won't come to this floor because of the infatuation with impeachment. We don't even have a bill to formally pay our troops and make sure they have the tools they need to defend this country because there's such an infatuation with impeachment. Madam Speaker, when you look through this resolution and you see how one-sided, how Soviet-style this is running, this is the United States of America. Don't run a sham process, a tainted process like this resolution ensures. It ought to be rejected, and I think you'll see bipartisan rejection of this resolution, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Massachusetts.
Madam Speaker, I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from New York, the distinguished chairman of the Committee on Judiciary, Mr. Nadler.
Gentleman's recognized for 2 minutes.
Yeah, but I mean, we got to.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I support this resolution because it is the solemn duty of the Congress to investigate the serious allegations against the President. I support this resolution because it is indefensible for any official to demand that an ally, one depending on our support in an existential struggle with Russia, investigate his or her political adversaries. I support this resolution because no person, Republican or Democrat, should be permitted to jeopardize America's security and reputation for self-serving political purposes. I support this resolution because if after a fair and thorough inquiry, the allegations against President Trump are found to be true, they would represent a profound offense against the Constitution and the people of this country. I support this resolution because I believe it is the duty of this House to vindicate the Constitution and to make it crystal clear to future presidents that such conduct, if proven, is an affront to the great public trust placed in him or her. I support this resolution not because I want the allegations to be true, they sadden me deeply, but because if they are true, the Constitution demands that we take action. I support this resolution because it lays the groundwork for open hearings. The House and the American public must see all of the evidence for themselves. I support this resolution because I know we must overcome this difficult moment for the nation. This resolution is necessary to ensure that our constitutional order remains intact for future generations. I support this resolution because we have no choice. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Oklahoma.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I am going to reserve my time as we're waiting for a speaker or two to come.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Massachusetts.
Madam Speaker, I am proud to yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from New York, the distinguished chairman of the Committee on Foreign Affairs, Mr. Engel.
Gentleman's recognized for 2 minutes.
I thank the gentleman and rise to support moving forward to the next open phase of this impeachment inquiry so that the American people can hear from witnesses, see the evidence, and understand the troubling story of what's taken place in this administration. As chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee, my priorities are supporting American diplomats and diplomacy, working with partners and allies, and ensuring that our foreign policy advances America's interests. This administration has unfortunately undermined all those priorities since its first day. But in the last month, we've learned more and more about just how deep this goes. The facts are clear. The White House launched a shadow foreign policy that circumvented and undermined our normal diplomatic channels. A distinguished career ambassador was publicly smeared and pushed aside. Critical military aid for Ukraine, a valued partner locked in a life-or-death struggle against Russia, was blocked. The goal, not some foreign policy priority, not an effort to make our country safer or stronger, quite the opposite, as delaying these resources hurt Ukraine and directly benefited Vladimir Putin. Why then? To pressure a foreign government to interfere in our 2020 elections. It's what the framers feared most. The president's own words say it best from the record of the call with President Zelensky as he sought the tools to push back against Russia. Mr. Trump's answer, "I'd like you to do us a favor, though." Since that first damning piece of evidence came to light, the Intelligence, Oversight, and Foreign Affairs Committees have worked to fill in the pieces of the puzzle thanks to the courage of public servants who obeyed the law and testified even in the face of bullying and intimidation from the administration, of ugly, baseless smears from the president's allies, and I condemn the shameful efforts to identify and harass the whistleblower whose life may be jeopardized for coming forward to tell the truth.
Gentleman's time's expired.
I salute all those patriots, and I salute my fellow committee chairs, Mr. Schiff, Ms. Maloney, and the late Mr. Cummings for their
I yield the gentleman additional.
Gentleman from Oklahoma. Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Massachusetts.
Madam Speaker, I yield 1 minute to the gentlewoman from California, the distinguished chairwoman of the Committee on Financial Services, Ms. Waters.
Gentlelady is recognized for 1 minute.
Am I doing this?
Thank you, Chairman McGovern. I rise in support of HRED 660 and the process that's set forth within by which the impeachment inquiry will continue to be conducted. To be clear, contrary to what these desperate Republicans have claimed, the Constitution imposes no requirement that a procedural resolution such as HRED 660 be voted on by the House. Claiming otherwise is but a fabrication meant to distract from the mountain of growing evidence that demonstrates this president abused his power for personal benefit. However, while not necessary, this resolution provides for impartial procedures similar to those used during the past impeachment proceedings. Because Republicans requested a formal procedural vote, I expect nothing less than their full support for HRED 660. Anything less would be shameful. As chairwoman of the Financial Services Committee, we've been conducting credible investigations into the conduct of this administration, and this work will continue in the manner outlined by HRED 660. I look forward to Democrats and Republicans alike prioritizing country over party as we swore an oath to do, voting in favor of HRED 660.
Gentleman from Massachusetts. Gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I yield 1 minute to the gentleman from California, Mr. Swalwell.
Gentleman's recognized for 1 minute.
I would like you to do us a favor, though. President Trump said those 10 words on July 25 to Ukraine's president before asking the Ukrainian president to investigate a potential political opponent. For the past month, the Intelligence Committee has led an investigation into what happened around that phone call. In this early investigative stage, we have heard powerful corroborating evidence that President Trump led an extortion shakedown scheme over the Ukrainians, leveraging $391 million of taxpayer dollars to have a foreign power assist him in his upcoming campaign. Just as powerful as the evidence we heard is the courage of the people who have come forward to provide it, defying lawless White House orders to obstruct and instead adhering to lawful congressional subpoenas. The evidence, however, is not a conclusion. At this stage, we must move now to a public process with due process protections for the president to secure and test that evidence. When our founders designed the Constitution, they considered a lawless president and how to hold that person accountable. James Madison said the Constitution needed a provision for defending the community against lawlessness.
Gentlemen's time's expired.
Now we must solemnly
Gentlemen's
embark
time's
upon
expired.
this journey. I yield back.
Members are reminded to refrain from engaging in personalities towards the president. Gentleman from Oklahoma.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to inquire from my friend if he has additional speakers.
We do. I yield 30 seconds to the gentleman from
Wait,
Colorado.
the gentleman was.
In that case, Madam Speaker, I'll reserve my time. Thank you.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Massachusetts.
Happy to yield 30 seconds to the gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Neguse.
Gentleman's recognized for 30 seconds.
Madam Speaker, today is a serious and solemn day for our country. The House's impeachment inquiry has exposed the truth and uncovered significant evidence that the president abused his power. To honor the oath to defend the Constitution that each of us took, we must move forward with this impeachment inquiry. For as Thomas Jefferson once said hundreds of years ago, a sacred respect for the constitutional law is the vital principle, the sustaining energy of a free government. Let us honor the Constitution and defend it today by voting yes on this resolution.
Time's expired. Gentleman from Oklahoma.
Madam Speaker, I continue to reserve my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Massachusetts.
Madam Speaker, I'm happy to yield 30 seconds to the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Boyle.
Gentleman's recognized for 30 seconds.
Madam Speaker, I did not come here to launch an impeachment process. However, the facts demand it. A republic, if you can keep it. What we decide today will say more about us than it says about the conduct of the president. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Oklahoma.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I continue to reserve my
Gentleman
time.
reserves. Gentleman from Massachusetts.
I yield, Madam Speaker, I yield 30 seconds to the gentleman from Rhode Island, Mr. Cicilline.
Gentleman's recognized for 30 seconds.
Madam Speaker, on opening day, we take an oath of office. We take an oath not to a king, not to a president, but to protect and defend the Constitution. It is our solemn duty. And in fact, this resolution sets forth the procedures for the next phase of our impeachment inquiry. We know substantial evidence has been presented that the president abused his power, undermined our national security, and undermined the integrity of our elections. We are duty-bound to proceed. It is a sad day, but not because Congress has the courage to stand up for our democracy, but because the president's conduct has forced this action. I urge my colleagues to approve this resolution.
Gentleman's time's expired. Gentleman from Oklahoma.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I continue to reserve my
Gentleman
time.
reserves. Gentleman from Massachusetts.
I'm prepared to close for our side, so I
Gentleman's
will yield
prepared
to
to
the
close.
gentleman.
Gentleman from Oklahoma.
Madam Speaker, if I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentleman's recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, if we defeat the previous question, I will amend the resolution to ensure transparency for the American people. My amendment will do three very simple things. First, it will require the chairman of the Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence to publicly release the transcripts of all depositions and interviews in a timely manner to allow any necessary redactions to protect classified or sensitive information. My colleagues on the other side have been operating in secret and behind closed doors. They've been violating standing House rules by preventing member access to documents, let alone sharing anything with the people that elected them to serve. Second, my amendment requires the Intel chairman to transfer all records or materials, including exculpatory records or materials, to the Judiciary Committee. The chairman is instructed to again make the necessary redactions to protect any classified or sensitive information. In contrast, the Democratic majority's resolution lets the chairman choose what information he will share. And finally, my amendment requires the Intelligence Committee's records and reports, as well as any material received from any other committee involved, be made available at least 72 hours prior to the Judiciary Committee considering any articles of impeachment or other recommendations. The resolution before us today does absolutely nothing to guarantee that the American people will see this vital information. The procedures my Democratic colleagues set up for this impeachment inquiry are fundamentally unfair and fundamentally partisan. They reject due process, they reject minority rights, and they reject adequate public disclosure. The American people will not respect the process. That's not fair, Madam Speaker. I urge the House to reject this measure, and I urge the House to insist on bipartisan procedures that respect the rights of the minority and the right of due process. With that, Madam Speaker, I yield 1 minute to the distinguished Republican leader, Mr. McCarthy of California.
Gentleman is recognized.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. Madam Speaker, elections have consequences. Our fellow Americans use their vote to choose who will work for them. So I ask you all a simple question, especially to my colleagues. Is that what is happening here today? Are we gathered in these final moments before we depart for a week to fund our government, to pay our troops? Are we gathered today to prove a new trade deal? Or are we gathered to debate the critical national security issues regarding China or Iran? Well, that answer would be unanimously no. We are not working for the American people. Those items would resemble the achievements of a productive Congress, a Congress that truly works for the people. But you know what this Congress counts? This Congress records is more subpoenas than laws. That's the legacy. It is not just devoid of solutions for the American people. It is now abusing its power to discredit democracy. By using secret interviews and selective leaks to portray the president's legitimate actions as an impeachable offense. Democrats are continuing their permanent campaign to undermine his legitimacy. For the last 3 years, they have predetermined the president's guilt. They have never accepted the voters' choice to make him president. So for 37 days and counting, they have run an unprecedented, undemocratic, and unfair investigation. This resolution today only makes it worse. I've heard members on the other side say they promise rights to the president, but only if he does what they want. That's the equivalent of saying in the First Amendment, you have the right to the freedom of speech, but you can only say the words I agree with. That's what you call due process. The amendment offered by my colleague, Mr. Cole, would help correct some of the transparency concerns we have witnessed over the last few weeks. But today is more than the fairness of an impeachment process. It is about the integrity of our electoral process. Democrats are trying to impeach the president because they are scared they cannot defeat him at the ballot box. That's not my words. That's the words of my colleagues from the other side of the aisle that has offered impeachment 3 different times. This impeachment is not only an attempt to undo the last election, it is an attempt to influence the next one as well. This is not what Democrats promised when they entered the majority 11 months ago. In this chamber, we heard from our Speaker while we all sat here. We heard what the Speaker said when she talked about words of optimism and cooperation. It was said we would work together to make America stronger, more secure, and more prosperous. We were told our mission was to return the power to the people. In fact, our new colleagues on the other side of the aisle were sent to Washington with a mandate to do just that. So what's happening? Nothing like that today. Not long ago, Democrats recognized that a partisan impeachment would put politics over people and harm our nation. That exact same Speaker that talked about cooperation, that talked about and promised the American people that they would be different. They would be different if you trusted you with the majority. You have failed in that promise. That Speaker said impeachment is so divisive to the country that unless there's something so compelling and overwhelming and bipartisan, the word of bipartisan. I do not think we should go down that path because it divides the country. What has changed since those words have been spoken? Alexander Hamilton wrote, "There will always be the greatest danger that the decision to use the impeachment power would be driven by partisan animosity instead of real demonstrations of innocence or guilt. This sham impeachment by Democrats have proven Hamilton right and portrays the Speaker's own words. I know emotions are high. I know members would even run for positions of chair simply on the fact that they would be a better chair for impeachment right after the election. But when we all stood that day and listened to the words of the Speaker of cooperation, we all raised our hand to uphold the Constitution. Tomorrow is November 1st. We're 1 year away from an election, not just for this House, but for the highest office of presidency. Why do you not trust the people? Why do you not allow the people to have a voice? Why, in a process that America lends their voice to all of us, that you deny us to speak for them? Is animosity risen that high? Is Hamilton proven correct again? There is a moment and time that you should rise to the occasion. This is that moment. This is the moment that history will write. History will ask you, when you cast this vote, when you cast a vote to justify something that has gone on behind closed doors, I want you to ask the historian and answer the question, what do you know that happened there? Have you read anything that took place that you just justified? What do you believe the definition of due process is? What do you think the First Amendment is? Do you have the right to have a voice, or only the words that you agree with? You may get elected in a primary, but in a general election, you're elected to represent the people of America, not to deny their voice. This House is so much better than what is transforming today. I believe everyone who runs for this office runs to solve a problem. But when you go back to the American public with the achievement of more subpoenas than laws, that is not why you ran. That is not why we are here. And that's why I agree with my colleague, Mr. Cole, that believes in the power of the people, people before politics, that we believe and know we can do better. That we believe the Speaker when she said about cooperation. We believed her when she said if you trusted them with the majority, they would be different. I guess it's only fitting you take this vote on Halloween. I yield back.
Members are directed to address their remarks to the chair. The gentleman from Oklahoma has 1 minute remaining.
With that, Madam Speaker, I will yield back the balance of my
Gentleman
time.
yields back. Gentleman from Massachusetts.
I yield myself the balance of the time.
Gentleman's recognized.
Madam Speaker, let me assure the distinguished minority leader that this Democratic majority can legislate and also fulfill our constitutional responsibilities to hold this president to account, because it is our job. We took an oath to do that. And in terms of our legislative accomplishments, they're second to none. When you were in the majority, you shut the government down. Today, the Education and Labor Committee just reported out the higher ed bill. We passed a bill to deal with gun violence. We passed the DREAM Act. We raised the minimum wage. We're working on a bill to lower prescription drugs. We passed a bill to protect our elections so Russia doesn't interfere in our elections ever again. So, Madam Speaker, I want to say to my colleagues that I am proud of the process we are following here today that brought us this resolution. Madam Speaker, past Congresses under the impeachments of President Nixon and Clinton found it prudent to have a resolution in place laying out the path forward. And that is what we are doing here today. This resolution before us today is based on precedent. It includes protections for President Trump. The President's counsel is given the right to ask questions when the evidence is presented. The rules here expressly provide his counsel the chance to be invited to offer a concluding presentation. Neither of these things were guaranteed to President Nixon and President Clinton. And it lays out a clear path forward so that the American people know what to expect going forward. Madam Speaker, the obstruction from this White House is unprecedented. It is stunning. We don't know whether President Trump will be impeached, but the allegations are as serious as it gets, endangering national security for political gain. Madam Speaker, history is testing us, and I worry, based on what we have heard from the other side today, that some may be failing that test. There are no kings and queens in America. That is what separates this country from so many other nations. No one is above the law. Let me repeat that. No one is above the law. I urge my colleagues to support this resolution. I yield back my time, and I move the previous question on the resolution.
The question now occurs on ordering the previous question on the resolution. All in favor say aye. Opposed, no. The opinion of the chair, the ayes have it.
Madam
Gentleman from
Speaker,
Oklahoma.
on that I would request the yeas and nays.
The yeas and nays are requested. Those favoring a vote by the yeas and nays will rise. A sufficient number having risen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. Pursuant to Clause 9 of Rule 20, the chair will reduce to 5 minutes the minimum time for any electronic vote on the question of adoption of the resolution. The chair emphasizes that this will be a 15-minute vote. On this vote, the yeas are 231, the nays are 196. The previous question is ordered.
Okay, what do we do? The question is on the adoption of the resolution. Those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, say no. Opinion of the chair, the ayes have it.
Madam Speaker,
Resolution is adopted.
Madam Speaker, on that I would request the yeas and nays.
The yeas and nays are requested. Those favoring a vote by the yeas and nays will rise. A sufficient number have arisen. The yeas and nays are ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This is a 5-minute vote, colleagues, a 5-minute vote. Why are we doing On this vote, the yeas are 232, the nays are 196. The resolution is adopted without objection. The motion to reconsider is laid upon the table. Where? Does the gentleman from Missouri seek recognition?
I request permission to speak for 1 minute out of
Without
turn.
any objection? Without objection, the gentleman is recognized. Objection is heard.
I don't see it.
Pursuant to House Resolution 656 and Rule 18, the Chair declares the House in the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union for further consideration of H.R. 823. Will the gentleman from California, Mr. Aguilar, kindly take the chair?
The House is in the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union for further consideration of Bill H.R. 823, which the clerk will report by title.
A bill to provide for the designation of certain wilderness areas, recreation management areas, and conservation areas in the state of Colorado and for other purposes.
Rose, Wednesday, October 30th, a request for a recorded vote on Amendment Number 6, printed in Part B of House Report 116-264, offered by the gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Crow, had been postponed. What now? Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, proceedings will now resume in Part B of House Report 116-264, on which further proceedings were postponed in the following order. Amendment Number 1 by Mr. Curtis of Utah. Amendment Number 5 by Mr. Tipton of Colorado. Amendment Number 6 by Mr. Crow of Colorado. The unfinished business is the request for a recorded vote on Amendment Number 1, printed in Part B of House Report 116-264 by the gentleman from Utah, Mr. Curtis, on which further proceedings were postponed and on which the noes prevailed by a voice vote. The clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment Number 1, printed in Part B of House Report Number 116-264, offered by Mr. Curtis of Utah.
A recorded vote has been requested. Those in support of the request for a recorded vote will rise and be counted. A sufficient number having risen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This will be a 2-minute vote.
On this vote, the yeas are 180 and the nays are 240. The amendment is not adopted. The unfinished business is the request for a recorded vote on Amendment Number 5, printed in Part B of House Report 116-264 by the gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Tipton, on which further proceedings were postponed and on which the nays prevailed by a voice vote. The clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment Number 5, printed in Part B of House Report Number 116.
The five of them are as in,
Boomerang?
no, as in, but this,
Under
this
Boomer?
would be the biggest. My wife calls my daughter Boo.
Okay.
And so it comes from that. We both call her Boo, which is our name for her. But since I'm not there anymore, Mom is
well, like I said, about a month ago, it went to maintenance and they updated it. They added some new firmware to it or something.
But
Yeah.
Boo Poo, Poo, for Shih Tzu,
Yeah.
Shit, that would be
So- Yeah.
even better.
Oh yeah.
Boomer.
Boomer.
No, no.
Actually, I think a better name for the dog would be Buster.
Like as in Dustbuster, because
Yeah.
it looks like.
All right. Well, if I have time
And the fact
today,
that
I'll bring it down
he's
here
gonna
to the studio
bust
and
my
clean it up
budget.
and feed it to the Mac and see if there's any
Yeah,
issues.
I'm beginning to
All
think
right.
that
All
maybe
right.
the car was cheaper.
Oh,
We always get
Not for a 16-year-old.
No. My sister
Okay. All
had
right.
one of the original
All righty.
240Zs.
Oh, okay.
And she was
Okay.
living up
All
here
righty.
as
Thanks.
a young
Uh-huh.
flight
Bye-bye.
attendant. She drove it for like 12 years. Kept in immaculate state. She decided I'm not, I'm going to finally get rid of it after 12 years.
Así es, ¿qué tal? Muy buenas tardes. Pues terminaron esta votación sobre esta resolución hace solo minutos. Fueron 232 votos a favor y 196 votos en contra, lo cual demuestra lo dividido que están ambos partidos. Pues fueron solo dos demócratas que votaron con los republicanos, un independiente, Justin Amash, votó con los demócratas y claramente cada uno de estos legisladores estaba votando de acuerdo a su partido y sus posiciones actualmente. Por otro lado, recordemos que esta resolución era simple y sencillamente una ruta para las investigaciones y cómo iban a continuar avanzando en este proceso de una posible destitución en contra del mandatario estadounidense Donald Trump. ¿Qué dice la resolución? Primero, reafirma las investigaciones que están ocurriendo. Segundo, asegura que habrá transparencia en este proceso. Tercero, activa audiencias públicas, que recordemos que desde que inició este proceso a finales de septiembre, hace unas 5 semanas, pues las audiencias se han estado llevando a cabo a puerta cerrada. Cuarto, permite que el presidente estadounidense Donald Trump y sus abogados personales participen en este proceso. Y por último, también dirige al Comité Judicial de ser necesario que comience a redactar los artículos para acusar al mandatario estadounidense Donald Trump. En las últimas horas y antes de que se llevara a cabo esta votación, Nancy Pelosi aseguró que este proceso simple y sencillamente debe hacerse para proteger la Constitución de Estados Unidos y que no tiene nada que ver con los partidos. Veamos.
Wait.
Y si bien esto simplemente demostraba cuáles serían las próximas legislaciones o las próximas normas a seguir en este proceso de destitución en contra del mandatario estadounidense Donald Trump, lo que queda claro es cómo se van a llevar a cabo las votaciones de ahora en adelante en este proceso y demuestra nuevamente la división que hay entre ambos partidos y que los demócratas opinan pues, que este proceso debe continuar haciéndose para proteger la Constitución, mientras que los republicanos con su voto hablaron y han dicho básicamente que esto es una farsa nuevamente, que es uno de los puntos que más ha criticado la líder de la Cámara de Representantes, Nancy Pelosi. Por otro lado, los legisladores salen hoy a un receso y se espera que las audiencias públicas puedan comenzar tan pronto como el 11 de noviembre. La próxima semana en Washington estará relativamente callada a diferencia del día de hoy. Esta es la información que tenemos en directo desde Washington. Emiliana Molina, Carlos Reyes.
Hi.
lot of people use it to sleep and sleep. Are we there yet? Soon, very soon. Is that what your people said? That's what our people said. Why?
So worried it was some certain
No.
no closer.
Well, they approved the rules.
Yeah, this was like 7 minutes.
And what did we choose for our gourmet dining
I just
today?
did whatever the quickest. There's a soup.
No soup for you. She boogie, Betsy, Betsy.
Yeah.
About 3 weeks ago, I was out eating lunch at Kent Island, and I saw these chairs, and I've got to have them.
Adirondack chair.
Adirondack, a pair connected by a table. Those are great.
Oh, it's actually attached.
Yeah. I don't know, but I don't care. I just want it.
You want to visit the table?
I want it because it's cool. And if I have a porch that faces the ocean or water, it'll be even better.
I know you're getting old quick with something like that. I know, it's like...
I am getting old.
Sure. Just can't wait to sit in that chair. There's a lot of votes. So,
I put it in there just still.
yeah, I use tops too.
Yeah, but I mean,
Yeah, basically it's like
everybody at Skype.
Yeah.
Everybody at Skype.
No, all I do is
Hey, Mark, it's Skype. Can you hear me? Hey, I saw Mr. Coffee. This is
so I had to do
14 minutes.
yeah. Mine was.
Yeah, you don't have to. I can't have
don't
more
want
than
to.
2 minutes.
If
you hear anything,
I don't care about that. Fill me up all day. My one's a little lineup actually. Larger.
I love it. Yeah. No, you don't get paid.
Switch that.
Really?
Oh, he's next.
Big time.
I used to burn Dutch.
He's been doing it for years.
Cans, 5-gallon cans. They were steel cans. Soda cans. Oh, yes. I know that. You get the fitting. Yeah. So they get
This sounds like ask you to work the parade, yeah.
Yeah. They're gonna probably wait till the last minute. Of course. It'll be tomorrow. This is too much busyness going on up here today. I'm gonna concentrate on that.
They'll go, Tiffany, do you have any availability for Saturday? We'd like you to cover the whole
parade.
Yeah, start where the parade starts and then end up being on sticks.
There's a parade Saturday?
Yes.
We'll make sure I'm not working.
Yeah, you're looking kind of peaked. You look like you're running a fever.
Please.
It's a vegetable.
I don't do parades. They don't do parades and hurricanes.
I'll still do hurricanes.
Have you ever done a wildfire?
Yes. Oh, it's great. It's amazing. Did them in Florida and Colorado. I loved it. Had a blast. Smelled like I've been on a 2-month camping trip every day, but didn't matter. Didn't matter.
TV crew just got doused in that red shit.
I've never done a wildfire.
Yeah, Saturday. Gonna do the same parade routes that they did for the cows.
Truck, everybody.
You ever do a wildfire, Kevin?
I've done fires, but not like this. That's in the Smokies where I was from. I haven't done it always. I mean, this is crazy. Christians out there are carrying their God.
Oh, is he?
Yeah. He got some nice stuff yesterday. He even sent a note. Like, I mean, they got kind of doused by the water. The helicopter went right over and just emptied the water, like right next to them. He didn't get covered, but it was like a great shot. Right by the Reagan Library.
Oh yeah, the Reagan Library.
Yeah, that's what makes it.
Yeah, the Santa
But I said
Ana
there's
winds.
60-mile-an-hour winds. I've covered fires, but nothing like that. California fires are a whole nother thing.
When I went out to Colorado in 2012 to cover the wildfires there, my reporter had made arrangements for us to fly in a C-130 that was going to drop flame retardant. And we were going to do it with like 2 GoPros and the camera. And it had a GoPro mounted in the back, GoPro, mounted, so we could see everything, and then me doing whatever I do. And so the wing was flying down from Montana to Colorado, and the plane that it was National Guard.
Did it crash?
The plane we were going to be on crashed on the way from Montana to Colorado, and they grounded the whole wing when they, But what was really interesting to me was I was working for the Chinese at the time, and the Chinese, I was working for the English-speaking channel, and it was okay for us to go on the flight, but the Mandarin-speaking channel found out we were going to do that, and they requested to do that, and the Air Force said, not going to do it. You're Chinese national. We're not going to let you on one of our military aircraft. And
is there a way you couldn't go in? Then nobody goes?
Well, no, because the plane crashed. They grounded the whole way.
Oh, yeah.
But what bothered me was the Mandarin Channel spending all this money for all the yellow clothing and masks and everything. But for us, the English speakers, no, we don't have budget for that. And we, you guys are just going to have to deal with it.
Get a washcloth.
Yeah, or bandana and soak it,
What flight's the case?
I was hoping these guys, when they eventually come, they're not flights you guys.
Why? Tomorrow, today's Thursday.
They're all flight.
The what?
The day
Every
They don't-
Thursday?
Not almost.
Oh, a long weekend. Huh?
Really don't really go back to the full session usually until Tuesday or just Monday.
So are they here next week?
no llega.
And
Vamos a intentar
that's a good thing.
Ya.
Expanding our circle in the church like so. When my mother passed away a number of years ago, I inherited 3 of the family Bibles. One is from 1809. The next one's from 1839. And the last one is my mother's Bible from 1938. But in the second Bible, it has records of cousins getting married, not to each other. Cousins and brothers and sisters and all this getting married and all that. And I love that, but we also have records like going to the general exchange, sorghum, and all these other things, and buying 30 slaves, and the slaves' names were, and all this kind of stuff, and descriptions of the slaves. No, this is in the 1839 Bible. But it's very cool to see these documents.
How do you preserve them?
Well, they've been sitting in the Bible. They've been folded up in the Bible. Well, the 1809 Bible, the backbone is broken. But it's really cool. And
Yeah, that's what I thought too.
no, it's been in a box. And so I'm giving those 3 Bibles with all the family history to my daughter for her 16th birthday, which I think is a very cool gift. And yeah, but it's just a very it's a cool gift. And I'm hoping that actually in the 1838, 39 Bible, either my grandmother or my great-grandmother or my great-grandfather typed copies of some of the bills of lading and other things that they had, just in case the ink smeared or faded and you couldn't read them, and put them in with them. So I think that's very cool, and to have access to a family history like that, which not everybody does, I think is very cool.
What part of was it Raleigh?
No, I'm from High Point, but my family is from Southwest Georgia, way down like Bainbridge, Donaldsonville. That's almost Panhandle, yeah. But yeah, my grandfather owned a hotel in Donaldsonville. He was a ne'er-do-well. He was a womanizer, a drinker, a gambler, and
All around nice guy.
yeah, one of us.
Hey, Georgia got us James Brown, so
Yeah.
grew up in the whorehouse.
I tell you, James Brown's funeral was the best party I've ever been to.
Really? You went to his funeral?
Oh yeah, I covered it.
Wow. Oh, yeah?
For
Wow.
CBS. It was wonderful.
Did you see that live shot he did when he got out of prison? On like CNN.
Yeah.
That blonde woman.
Yeah, I remember
He's
that.
clicked up, he's like cooked out of his brains. And he's just like, wow. Ask him questions and he's just trying to say it.
He's the man.
He's like, I gotta answer my pants.
Wait, I'm trying to figure out if that was that in Harlem?
Sounds like, is that Harry's actual place?
Well, the body laid in the Apollo Theater.
That's where it was. I was there. I did that too.
And so we were in Augusta at the James Brown Arena.
Okay.
I had been down at Sea Island with Bob Schieffer the night before, At the G7?
No, because he has a vacation home there, and he was White House correspondent for Gerald Ford when he died, and that was that week. So you had James Brown, Gerald Ford, and somebody else all died that week. So we left from Sea Island after doing Schieffer's live shot and drove to Augusta for the service the next day. They have one of those page signs where, you know, page comes up and it has the writing, and it says, page comes up, says, "Rest in peace, Godfather of soul." Then the next page comes up, "James so-and-so Brown, born so-and-so, died so-and-so." Next page comes up, and this is what it says. It's in the tape library. James Brown will be appearing today at the James Brown Arena. Oh, wow. And there were 4,000 people in line to come by and see the funeral. He had the 18-karat gold toes on his cowboy boots.
James Brown changed the world, man.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
You got candy? That's a lot.
are you a fan of short films?
Butterfinger.
Go on YouTube. Look up BMW James Brown. BMW made a series of short films with all these high-end directors like John Woo, Frank Miller.
I've seen some documentaries with James
This is not a documentary. This is a movie. But in this particular one,
he's in it?
he's in it. Yeah.
Okay.
And it's got James
Is he playing
Brown.
himself?
Yes.
Yeah.
And it's
Because you can only.
and it's he moans so that I have put in closed captions.
on the air.
Have you seen James Brown teaches his dance?
No, I haven't. I'll have to look.
Google that on YouTube.
James Brown what?
Teaches his dance.
What's that?
It's just him standing in like a. It's got to be like 70s. He's got bell bottoms on. He's got a vest.
While none of us ran for office to impeach a president, everyone on this stage agrees that we have put into place a fair series of procedures to govern how this process moves forward. These procedures are guided by the precedent Congress set under previous impeachment. They guarantee protections for the president and his counsel that were not expressly provided during prior impeachments, and they lay out a clear path forward so that the American people can hear firsthand the serious and alarming allegations about President Trump's abuse of power. I'm proud of the resolution we put together. I believe that it will withstand the test of time. I'm proud of the work of the Rules Committee, and even though it got somewhat contentious last night, I want to say I'm proud of the way all members, Democrats and Republicans, conducted themselves. There was no live streaming and narration during the markup. Nobody stormed the committee. Nobody seized the microphone. People behave, I think, in a way that is respectful of this institution, and I appreciate the cooperation of Ranking Member Tom Cole and the other Republicans as well. I want to thank all the committee chairs here for their hard work to uncover the truth on behalf of the American people. This vote is a victory this vote is a victory not for any of us, but on behalf of the constituents who sent us here and who demand that we follow the facts and uphold our oath. I also want to thank the courageous civil servants who have come forward to testify so far, many in contradiction of this administration's attempts to silence them and at great risk to their own career. Let me conclude with this. I truly believe that 100 years from now, historians will look back at this moment and judge us by the decisions we are making here today. At the end of the day, this resolution isn't about Donald Trump. It isn't about any of us. It's about our Constitution, and it's about our country. And now I'm happy to yield to the distinguished Chair of the Select Committee on Intelligence, Adam Schiff.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. This is a solemn day in the history of our country when the President's misconduct has compelled us to continue to move forward with an impeachment inquiry. The resolution today sets out the procedures going forward with that impeachment process. The Founding Fathers understood that a leader might take hold of the Oval Office who would sacrifice the national security, who would fail to defend the Constitution, who would place his personal or political interests above the interests of the country. They understood that might happen. And they provided a mechanism to deal with it, and that mechanism is called impeachment. We take no joy in having to move down this road and proceed with the impeachment inquiry, but neither do we shrink from it. The resolution from the perspective of the Intelligence Committee sets out important procedures for how we may conduct our open hearings. During the depositions that we've conducted thus far, we've used a format that we believe very conducive to the fact-finding process. Those procedures now will be incorporated into the open hearings in which staff counsel will be permitted for lengthy periods of time to do sustained questioning for up to 45 minutes per side, followed by member questioning. We've used this, I think, to great success for both parties during the course of the depositions, where in the depositions we have alternated 1 hour for the majority, 1 hour for the minority, 45 minutes for the majority, 45 minutes for the minority. In those depositions, over 100 members have been eligible to participate. I should tell you that notwithstanding those that have complained about lack of access to the depositions, most of the members who have been permitted to attend have failed to attend, have not made use of the availability of attending each and every deposition. But those that have, on both sides of the aisle, have had an equal opportunity to question the witnesses. And indeed, when we move into open session, both parties will have an equal opportunity to question any witnesses that are called. The resolution will also permit me as the chair to begin releasing the transcripts of the depositions. And I think that you will see when those are released just what equal opportunity members of both parties have had. We recognize the seriousness of this undertaking. We recognize that we have been compelled by the circumstances to move forward. When a president abuses his or her office, when a president sacrifices the national interest, when a president refuses to defend the Constitution, and does so for the purpose of advancing a personal or political agenda, the founders provided the remedy. I make no prejudgment as to whether that remedy will be warranted when we finish these hearings. I will wait until all the facts are put forward. We will undertake this duty with the seriousness it deserves and to the best of our ability. Thank you. And I now yield to the Chair of the Judiciary Committee, Mr. Nadler.
Thank you very much. No person, Republican or Democrat, President or anyone else, should be permitted to jeopardize America's security and reputation for self-serving political purposes. No president, no official can demand that an ally of the United States do anything in particular to help his or her political ambitions as a condition of receiving help from our country. If, after a fair and thorough inquiry, the allegations against President Trump are found to be true, they would represent a profound offense against the Constitution and against the people of this country. It is the duty of the House to vindicate the Constitution and to make it crystal clear to future presidents that this kind of conduct, if proven, is an affront to the great public that place their trust in him or her. This resolution that we passed today lays the groundwork for open hearings in both the Intelligence Committee and the Judiciary Committee. The House and the American public must see all the evidence for themselves. The resolution makes clear the ample safeguards in the process that will be given and that will be adhered to. The resolution is necessary to ensure that our constitutional order remains intact for future generations. What we have seen are allegations of conduct on many levels that, if proven to be true, are a challenge to the democratic order, to the democratic norms on which we all depend. We must hand this country to our children with its democracy in as good a shape as when it was handed to us. We simply have no choice because no one can be above the law, and we must enforce that. I'll now yield to the Chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee, Mr. Engel.
Thank you. I'm Elliot Engel, Chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee. For the last month, we've been working lockstep with the Intelligence and Oversight Committees on this impeachment inquiry. So far, we've seen damning evidence that the President abused his power and jeopardized our national security to help his own political fortunes. He pressed for another round of foreign interference in an American election. It's what the framers feared the most. Today, we've laid the groundwork for the next open phase of this investigation. Moving ahead, the Foreign Affairs Committee will continue to support this effort because we know that the administration's abuse of power resulted in our foreign policy being subverted and our diplomats being smeared, sidelined, and harassed. We cannot stand for that. I'm glad that the resolution we passed today will provide for an open, fair process that will allow the American people to hear from witnesses, see the evidence, and understand the troubling story of what the President and his allies did. They deserve to know the facts, and they soon will. Thank you. And now it's my pleasure to call on Carolyn Malone, the Acting Chair of the Oversight Committee.
Thank you. I will be brief. I have just 2 points. First, I want to commend my colleagues for their diligent work. This is a very grave matter. As they have shown, we are acting deliberatively, thoroughly, and without delay. Secondly, I want to remind everyone of the words of our beloved former chairman, Elijah Cummings. And quote, he said, "We are fighting for the soul of democracy," end quote. That is our core mission under the Constitution. We cannot allow a president or any president to extort foreign countries into interfering with our democracy. We cannot allow a president to withhold critical military aid that we have in Congress provided in order to counter Russian aggression. And we cannot allow a president to ignore duly authorized subpoenas, withheld documents, prevent witnesses from testifying, covering up wrongdoing, and obstructing Congress. This is a fundamental corruption of the Constitution, an abuse of power, and a breach of the oath of office. Thank you, and I yield now to the chairman of our caucus, Hakeem Jeffries.
Thank you, Congresswoman Maloney. I thank the distinguished chairs for their diligent work throughout this process. This is not a celebratory moment here in the capital city. This is a solemn moment. It's a sober moment. It's a serious moment. None of us came to Congress to impeach this president or any president. But duty now requires that we investigate the serious wrongdoing that is hiding in plain sight. This is a moment for every single member of the House of Representatives to put principle over party, to put the Constitution above corruption, to put democracy above dereliction of duty. This is not a moment, this impeachment inquiry is not about Democrats versus Republicans. It's not about the left versus the right. It's not about progressives versus conservatives. The impeachment inquiry is about right versus wrong. And we have a constitutional responsibility to follow the facts, apply the law, be guided by the Constitution, and present the evidence of wrongdoing to the American people. The impeachment inquiry is about abuse of power. It's about betrayal. It's about corruption. It's about national security. It's about the integrity of our elections. It's about defending our democracy for the people. With that, I think we have an opportunity to take just a handful of questions.
Chairman,
First row.
And any chairman who would like to speak, in light of all the information that you've gotten from testimony from witnesses behind closed doors, are you willing to expand the inquiry beyond the narrow scope of the Ukraine scandal, and are you also able to share any of the witnesses that you would like to testify publicly?
Well, the process that has been set forth by Speaker Pelosi from the very beginning is that we are operating under an impeachment inquiry umbrella, where there are 6 committees of relevant jurisdiction that will explore the wrongdoing that exists coming out of 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, and at the end of the process make recommendations to the chair and the Judiciary Committee with a continued focus on the Trump-Ukraine scandal, the abuse of power, the solicitation of foreign interference in the 2020 election. And that inquiry, of course, will continue to be led by Chairman Adam Schiff and the Intel Committee because it relates to a matter of national security.
But to expand on your question, we're not going to speculate on that now, but we'll see what happens.
Can you identify any witnesses to come before the public?
We're not going to speculate on that now.
If you could go to the mic, sir. Now that the resolution has passed, when can the American people expect to see open hearings? Might it be as early as the week after next?
That you should really ask Chairman Schiff, and it depends on the speed with which things go there, and I can't answer that question.
How crucial is John Bolton's testimony to how building the public case that you hope to build against President Trump?
Again, you should ask Chairman Schiff that, but obviously any testimony is very important testimony, especially from someone so located, so crucially located.
Front row.
Chairman, you say that you have the right to impose appropriate remedies if you determine that the president is unlawfully blocking witnesses. What do you mean by that?
Well, it's elementary that where one party to a litigation unlawfully blocks the investigation, as this president has been doing, although we hope he won't continue doing it. You may have to take some steps. We may have to draw adverse inferences. We may have to do other things. We'll see.
What kind of punishments are you considering?
I'm not considering anything at the moment. We'll see what happens.
Third row.
Chairman, how do you interpret the way Republicans voted this morning and the fact that 2 Democrats voted with them on the resolution?
I interpret that the Republicans are ignoring evidence that they don't want to see a proper investigation. Period. That's all I can draw.
Last question. Last question.
It's okay, go ahead.
All right, 2 questions then. First of all, Chairman Nadler, how long do you believe House Judiciary will need once you receive reports? And obviously, I think it's important for the American public to understand the timeline here, if at all possible. And then for all of you who have supported this bill.
I'm sorry?
For everyone on here, this bill has more ability for the president once this reaches the Judiciary Committee than the Intelligence Committee. That's something that Republicans have a problem with. Why have those different abilities for the president in Judiciary than Intelligence?
Well, your first question was the timeline.
Yeah.
I don't know. We don't know. It depends. It depends on obviously how many witnesses, etc. I can't speculate on that. The second question is: remember, the Intelligence Committee is doing a basic investigative job, a job that in past impeachments was done by the Starr Commission or by the Irvin Committee, etc. Once it goes to Judiciary, it's a different stage, and it's a different stage. It's not the initial fact-finding stage, and it's proper that the president have more recourse at that point. Now remember, the minority, the Republicans, have the same rights and have rights to call witnesses, to examine witnesses, etc. In Intel. They will have the same rights in Judiciary. But once it gets to Judiciary, if we're carrying on an impeachment, if there's been a recommendation for an impeachment and we're carrying on that investigation, that inquiry at that point, then the president ought to have more rights than in the initial fact-finding stage.
President yesterday directed his Republican defenders to focus on substance. That's what House Democrats have been doing from the very beginning, and we invite our Republican colleagues, pursuant to the direction of the president, to do the same. What is this all about? Congress, on a bipartisan basis, allocated $391 million to Ukraine in military and economic assistance because we deemed it in our national security interest. Ukraine right now is under attack from Russian-backed separatists. Ukraine is a friend, Russia is a foe. Ukraine is a democracy, Russia is a dictatorship. The United States may very well be the only thing standing between Vladimir Putin and Ukraine being completely overrun by Russia as part of his fantasy to reconstruct what he views as the glory days of the Soviet Union. In that context, Congress allocated the $391 million in a bipartisan fashion. In February, the administration wrote to Congress and said the aid is on the way, but it never showed up. And then in May, the Trump Department of Defense wrote to Congress again and said the aid is on the way. And in that letter said all necessary preconditions have been met by the new Ukrainian government, including the implementation of anti-corruption protocols. That was in the letter that was sent by Trump's Department of Defense in May. And yet the aid never showed up. Twice during the summer, Mitch McConnell called up the Trump administration and said, "Where's the aid?" Mitch McConnell couldn't get a good answer. And then on July 18th, At the White House, the Office of Management and Budget holds a meeting. Mulvaney is there, apparently, where they say the reason the aid has not been released is at the explicit direction of the President of the United States of America. On July 25th, 1 week later, we understand why. His own words, "Do us a favor, though," pressuring a foreign government to target an American citizen for political gain and thereby solicit foreign interference in the 2020 election while withholding this aid from a vulnerable Ukraine. Mr. President, that's the substance of the matter. That's what we're going to focus on moving forward. Thank you.
And let me add to that and say that foreign aid is a very important component of what we do around the world in order to keep America really at the top of the world. And the money that the Congress allocated for foreign aid was not the president's personal piñata that he can use however he wants. By withholding that money, he's taking an asset of the United States, not a personal asset of the United States, and withholding it to try to coerce the leader of another country to help him in his political election. I mean, if that isn't crazy, then I don't know what is. So this really just cannot stand. Foreign aid is not the president's personal piñata to do what he wants with it. The Congress appropriates it, and Ukraine is in a very important crossroads right now. And so this is a very, very serious matter. It's not simply a matter of the president talking to a leader of a foreign country. It's a matter of taking American money that the Congress allocated for foreign aid for a country, to withhold it and say to that leader, I'm not going to give it to you unless you do what I need you to do. That is an absolute disgrace. And that's one of the reasons we're here.
Thank you very much.
Somebody's phone. Whose phone?
Oh, okay, we'll leave it.